October 1944, a cold Iowa morning. The whistle of the inbound train rolled across the empty fields like a ghostly reminder that war had reached even here, halfway across the world from the battlefields of Europe. Steam hissed against the pale sky as the train slowed to a halt beside the newly built platform of Camp Alona. 12 women stepped down from the rail car, their breath visible in the frigid air. Their gray uniforms hung loose from long travel, their faces pale and thin. None of them spoke. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on gravel and the distant caw of crows circling over the corn stubble beyond the fences. These were not soldiers in the usual sense. They were clerks, nurses, radio operators, members of the German Women's Auxiliary Forces captured in France and shipped across the Atlantic. Prisoners of war, yes, but this scene didn't look like the brutality they'd been warned about. At the edge of the platform stood Margaret Sullivan, the civilian administrator overseeing the camp. A tall woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, she carried herself with the kind of authority that came from surviving personal loss. The small gold star pinned to her lapel glinted faintly in the morning light, a silent reminder of her son, Tommy, who'd been killed in action 3 months earlier in Italy. She'd buried her grief in her work, determined that Camp Alona would run differently. By the book, yes, but with humanity. Margaret had read every line of the Geneva Convention 3 times over. She'd insisted on clean barracks, proper medical examinations, and fair treatment for all detainees. "We'll show the world what decency looks like," she'd told the guards during orientation. Even when it's hard. When the train doors slid open, the first to appear was a woman who carried herself with quiet authority. Greta Hoffmann, 28 years old, once a schoolteacher from Hamburg. Her records described her as intelligent, fluent in English, disciplined. She had volunteered for the Women's Auxiliary in 1942, not out of zeal but survival. Her husband had been killed in North Africa, and she needed work to feed her younger sister. Greta adjusted her cap, eyes sharp but calm. She was used to leading classrooms full of restless students. Now, the women behind her looked to her for the same kind of guidance. Behind her came the others, 12 in all, tired, hungry, and wary. Some carried small bundles of belongings permitted during capture. Others clutched photographs or rosaries hidden in coat pockets. Their expressions were careful masks of dignity layered over exhaustion. 2 armed American guards flanked the ramp, their rifles angled downward, more symbolic than threatening. Sergeant James Riley, a battle-worn veteran from the North African campaign, stepped forward with a clipboard in hand. "Ladies," he began, his voice steady, "welcome to Camp Alona. You'll be processed according to Geneva Convention standards. You'll have housing, food, and medical care. You follow instructions. We'll get along fine." The words were translated into German by an interpreter, but Greta answered in clear English before he finished. "We understand, Sergeant. We will comply." Her accent was soft, her tone formal. Riley gave a short nod. "Respect. Recognizing respect." The processing took 2 hours. Fingerprints, medical checks, identity photos. Each woman's name was recorded meticulously. Each personal item logged. There was no shouting, no humiliation, just efficiency, tinged with the awkwardness of 2 worlds forced to coexist. Margaret watched quietly from the corner of the administrative office, taking notes in her leather-bound log. The women were younger than she'd expected. Girls, really. None older than 35. They looked less like enemies and more like displaced souls trying to make sense of where the war had dropped them. By noon, the new arrivals were escorted to their barracks, plain but clean. Wooden bunks with straw mattresses, folded blankets, and a small stove for warmth. To the women who had feared cages and cruelty, it was almost unimaginable. "This is for us," one of them whispered in German, running her fingers along the edge of the neatly folded blanket. Greta only nodded, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of relief. At the same time, inside the camp kitchen, Sam Washington was stirring a large metal pot. The rich smell of vegetable soup filled the air. Carrots, potatoes, a hint of bay leaf. Sam was the camp cook, a former Army quartermaster turned civilian contractor. At 42, he'd cooked for soldiers from every corner of the country. Mississippi sharecropper, Brooklyn dockhand, Boston officers, men who complained about the same stew but always came back for seconds. Today, though, he'd taken extra care. "Let's give 'em something decent," he'd told his kitchen helpers that morning. Something warm they can recognize as kindness. Beside the soup, on trays lined with clean cloths, sat golden squares of cornbread, soft, warm, and glistening with butter. To Sam, it wasn't just food, it was tradition. It was the taste of home and survival, a dish that had kept his grandmother's family alive through poverty and drought back in Alabama. He knew the German women wouldn't understand that history, but maybe, he thought, they'd feel the warmth of it. When the women filed into the mess hall for their first meal, the atmosphere was a strange mix of curiosity and fear. They moved in quiet lines, tin trays in hand, following the guards' gestures. Sam ladled soup with a steady rhythm, offering a reassuring nod to each woman who passed. When he added a piece of cornbread to the edge of each tray, he smiled. "Welcome to Iowa," he said simply. The German women looked at the strange yellow squares, exchanging puzzled glances. Greta was the first to sit. She examined the cornbread carefully, pressed it with her finger, broke it in half, watched the crumbs fall onto her plate. The texture was wrong. Too soft, too sweet. Bread, in her mind, was dense, dark, and crusty. This was something else entirely. "Das ist kein Brot," she said under her breath, then louder, almost laughing. "It's not even bread!" A ripple of laughter ran through the group. The tension broke all at once, replaced by the kind of nervous giggling that happens when fear finally lets go. Someone mimed pinching the cornbread between two fingers, and soon the whole table was laughing. Across the room, Sam froze. He'd been wiping his hands on his apron, ready to serve another pot of soup, when he heard it, that laughter. He didn't understand the words, but he didn't need to. The tone was unmistakable. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, just dismissive. But to Sam, it landed like a slap. He'd grown up on cornbread. It had carried his family through winters when flour was too expensive and wheat couldn't grow. His grandmother used to say, "Cornbread don't look like much, but it'll keep your soul from starving." Jamaron. Now, watching the German women mock the food he'd made as a gesture of kindness, he felt something twist deep in his chest. Sergeant Riley, standing nearby, noticed. "Ignore it, Sam," he murmured. "They don't know better." Sam nodded stiffly. But that didn't make it hurt less. The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence. The guards, who had been relaxed moments before, now stood straighter, eyes hard. The women, realizing too late that their laughter had shifted the room's temperature, ate quietly. By evening, the story had already traveled through the camp. The German women laughed at the cornbread. Sam washed the trays long after the others had gone, his motions slow and methodical. The smell of soap and starch filled the kitchen. On the counter beside him sat a cooling tray, the last untouched piece of cornbread. He picked it up, stared at it, and then tossed it into the waste bin. From that night on, cornbread vanished from the menu at Camp Alona. The next morning, Margaret noticed the change immediately. The air felt different, colder, quieter. The guards were polite but distant. The women, too, sensed the shift. Their laughter had cost them something invisible. Greta lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling beams, the sound of the wind scratching faintly at the walls. In the stillness, she remembered her mother's voice from years ago, back when post-war Germany had known hunger too. "When someone offers you bread," her mother had said, "you say thank you, even if it tastes of sawdust." Greta closed her eyes, realizing the truth in that simple lesson. They hadn't laughed at a strange food, they'd laughed at kindness. And that mistake was going to haunt her longer than she could imagine. The chill that settled over Camp Alona after that day had nothing to do with the Iowa weather. It was something quieter, the kind of cold that settles between people who've hurt each other without meaning to. Sam Washington kept doing his job. The soups stayed hot, the meals on time, but the warmth had gone out of the kitchen. The guards noticed it first. Sam wasn't humming anymore. He moved like a man working inside his own silence. The German women noticed it too. Gone were the golden squares that had baffled and amused them. In their place came regulation white bread, store-bought, tasteless, neatly sliced, and utterly forgettable. They chewed in silence now, the echo of that laughter still lingering in the corners of the mess hall like smoke after a fire. Even the guards had changed. Before, there had been small kindnesses, a shared smile, a cigarette offered through the fence, a nod of mutual understanding. Now they just nodded once, businesslike, eyes forward. Margaret Sullivan could feel the tension in the air every time she made her morning round. It reminded her of something her grandmother had once said back in Boston during the Depression. You can tell how a nation's doing by the way its people eat together, or stop eating together. She found Sam in the kitchen one afternoon, slicing potatoes with mechanical precision. "Sam," she said softly, "you've been quiet lately." He didn't look up. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Margaret watched him for a moment. His face looked older somehow. Not tired, just guarded. "I wanted to ask you something," she said finally. "The cornbread. I never knew much about it growing up. What's its story?" That made him pause. Slowly, he set the knife down. "My grandmother used to call it survival bread," he said after a moment. "When folks didn't have wheat or couldn't afford it, they'd grind field corn, mix it with milk or water, maybe an egg if you had one, bake it just long enough to hold shape." He walked to the pantry and pulled down a sack of cornmeal, letting the golden powder sift through his fingers like sand. "During slavery times," he continued, "that's what kept families alive. Corn and molasses. Sometimes that was it. And during the Depression, same thing. People learned quick. You either make do with what you've got, or you don't make it." Margaret nodded slowly. "So it wasn't just food?" "No, ma'am," Sam said, his voice quiet but steady. "It was proof you could keep going. Poor man's bread, sure, but honest food. Doesn't pretend to be fancy, just keeps you alive." He dusted off his hands, returning the sack to the shelf. "Guess I forgot," he added with a faint, bitter smile, "that not everyone knows what survival looks like." Margaret didn't argue. She just listened because deep down she understood. She'd seen survival before, in soup lines, in mothers handing their last loaf to their kids. That night, Greta lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The laughter replayed in her mind like a record she couldn't stop. She could still see the look on the cook's face. Not anger, not humiliation, but something deeper, hurt. Her mother's voice came back once more. "Gratitude is the first courtesy." And she realized she'd failed that test completely. The next day, she gathered the other women around her bunk. Their breath fogged the cold air inside the barracks. "I have been thinking," she began in German, her voice low but firm, "about what we did." The youngest, Liesel Wagner, frowned. "It was only a joke, Greta. It looked strange, that bread." "Yes," Greta said. "Strange, but we laughed at kindness. That is the greater shame." The others fell silent. Some looked down at their hands. Others simply nodded. They'd all felt the shift, the change in how the guards looked at them, how the cook no longer smiled. Greta continued, "We are teachers, clerks, nurses, educated women, yet we behaved like children. My mother once told me, if someone offers you bread, even if it is burned or bitter, you say thank you, because they are sharing what little they have." Her words hung in the air like frost. No one argued. By mid-November, something began to thaw, not in the weather, but in people. The German women were given permission to attend English lessons in the mess hall each afternoon. Margaret had pushed for it, arguing it would keep morale stable and help prevent cultural misunderstandings. Greta volunteered to lead the study group. She sat at one of the long tables surrounded by newspapers Margaret had provided. The Des Moines Register spread open like a window into American life. "Listen," Greta said, pointing to an article about Iowa farmers donating corn to feed European refugees. They use the word feed, not nourish. Different word, same meaning. But maybe they think of food as something more humble. The women leaned in, sounding out phrases in careful English. Victory Garden, War Bonds, Thanksgiving Drive. For a few moments each day, they weren't prisoners. They were students again. From the kitchen doorway, Sam sometimes paused to watch. He noticed how Greta's tone softened as she corrected pronunciation, how her patience reminded him of his mother teaching Sunday school back home. He found himself lingering longer than necessary, wiping down counters, pretending to check supplies. But in truth, he was listening. The first sign of real change came when Sergeant Riley brought news during supper. "There's a card game tonight," he said, trying to sound casual. "Off-duty guards, nothing serious. Mrs. Sullivan thought maybe some of you ladies might want to learn American games. Poker, mostly." Greta blinked. "Poker?" Riley grinned. "You'll learn fast. I got a feeling teachers make good players." It was Margaret's idea, another quiet attempt to rebuild trust. She knew that sometimes connection came not through speeches or rules, but through the small things: shared laughter, shared rule, shared games. That night, the mess hall lights burned a little longer. Guards and prisoners sat around a single table, awkward at first, then slowly easing into the rhythm of play. Corporal James Mitchell, a farm boy from Nebraska, explained the rules with patient care. 3 of a kind, 2 of another. That's a full house. Liesl tried to repeat the English term, her accent wrapping around the syllables like a melody. Full house, she said proudly, like house full of people. Even Mitchell chuckled. Exactly. For the first time since arriving, the sound of laughter in the mess hall didn't sting. A few days later, laughter turned into worry. Liesl collapsed during morning roll call. Her skin burned with fever, and her breathing came in short, ragged gasps. The camp doctor was summoned immediately. Influenza, he said grimly. She's young, she'll fight it, but she'll need care. Word spread quickly. For a camp that had seen months of tension, the sickness cut through every barrier. Even the guards softened, voices quieter, movements gentler. In the kitchen, Sam heard the news while prepping lunch. He froze, spoon mid-air. Without thinking, he reached for a bowl and started mixing ingredients he hadn't touched in months. Cornmeal, milk, honey, his grandmother's remedy for fever. Cornbread soaked in warm milk, sweetened just enough to comfort a child. When the bowl was ready, he carried it himself to the infirmary. Liesl lay pale and sweating, her eyes half open. Greta sat beside her, whispering in German, soothing words that didn't seem to reach the fever. Sam hesitated at the doorway. Then he stepped forward quietly. She awake? Greta looked up, surprised. A little. Sam nodded and pulled a chair beside the cot. I brought something. He dipped a spoon into the warm mixture and held it near Liesl's lips. My grandmother used to make this when a kid was sick. Said it could fix anything that wasn't broken beyond repair. Liesl blinked, confused, then opened her mouth just enough for a small bite. The sweetness hit first, then the soft, warm texture, familiar in its simplicity. For the first time in days, her face relaxed. Danke, she whispered faintly. Then, in halting English, it tastes like hope. Greta's eyes filled. She whispered the word back in German, Hoffnung, hope. Sam just nodded. Yeah, he said softly. That's about right. In that quiet, sterile room, the line between captor and captive disappeared completely. It wasn't an American feeding a German prisoner. It was just one human being taking care of another. By the time the first frost spread across the camp yard, Liesl's fever had broken. Her recovery changed something in the air at Camp Alona, something deeper than words. The guards who had once avoided eye contact now greeted the German women with polite nods. Sam Washington, who had gone weeks without a smile, began to hum again while stirring his soup. And in the barracks, laughter had returned, softer this time, less nervous, more real. Liesl, her hair tied back with a scrap of ribbon Margaret had given her, carried herself with a new kind of confidence. You see, she told Greta in careful English. Cornbread! It saved me! Greta couldn't help but smile. Then we owe the cook an apology that words cannot repay. Liesl nodded solemnly. Maybe we bake him cake. Greta laughed for the first time in weeks. No, Liesl, I think he's had enough of our baking opinions. Their friendship, fragile as it was, had begun to take root, and outside their small world of fences and guard towers, the war still raged. But in Camp Alona, something resembling peace had quietly taken hold. Margaret Sullivan, ever watchful, noticed the shift as well. She saw the German women lingering in the mess hall to practice English. She noticed Sam staying late to make sure the food was warm enough. She told herself it was just morale improving. But part of her knew better. It was empathy, the simplest kind. The letter-writing privilege arrived one cold afternoon in late November. A Red Cross representative delivered the official authorization, stamped and sealed with international insignia. Margaret gathered the women in the mess hall after dinner. Her tone was formal, but her eyes carried a trace of warmth. Each of you may write one letter a month to immediate family, she announced. The letters will be reviewed for security, of course, but your messages will reach home through official Red Cross channels. For a moment, no one moved. Then the meaning sank in. 12 women who hadn't heard from their families in months suddenly had a thread back to the world they'd lost. Greta felt her heart pound. Her last letter from Hamburg had come before she was captured, before the bombings that had leveled the city's harbor district. Her younger sister, Anna, had 2 children. Were they even alive? She didn't know. The not knowing had become its own kind of torture. That night, she sat at a long table in the mess hall with a blank sheet of Red Cross stationery before her. The kerosene lamp flickered, casting small halos of light on the paper. Her pen hovered for a long time before she began. Liebe Anna, I am safe and well treated in a place called Iowa. The land here stretches like the sea we once watched as children, endless and quiet. We are given food, strange food sometimes. There is a yellow bread made from corn that I did not understand at first, but it fills the stomach and is made with care. She paused, staring at the ink still wet on the page. The Americans are not as we were told. There is decency here. Rules, yes, but also kindness. Tell the children that Tante Greta thinks of them every day. Tell them to look for the stars and think of me under the same sky. When she folded the letter, her hands were shaking. She handed it to Margaret with a soft "Danke." Margaret nodded, her own voice tight. I'll make sure it's sent tomorrow. What Greta didn't know was that Margaret had written a letter of her own that same night, not to family, but to the War Department in Washington, urging them to expand humanitarian programs for POW. If we can show mercy in war, she wrote, perhaps the world will remember what peace is supposed to look like. The atmosphere around the camp changed in the weeks that followed. The guards relaxed, even joked sometimes. The German women, now more comfortable in English, began helping around the camp, mending uniforms, repairing linens, small acts of contribution that carried a quiet dignity. Sam had returned to his old rhythm. He didn't talk much about feelings, but his kitchen told the story. He added more spices to the soups, took time with presentation again. And once, during cleanup, Margaret caught him smiling faintly at the sound of Liesl singing softly in German while sweeping. By Thanksgiving, the line between us and them had blurred into something almost human again. Margaret decided the day couldn't pass without a proper meal. Turkey, stuffing, the works, she told Sam that morning. And make it special, please. Sam grinned a little. Even for the POWs? Especially for them, she replied. The whole world could use a little gratitude right now. That afternoon, the mess hall smelled like home. The scent of roasted turkey and sage filled the air, mingling with wood smoke and the faint sweetness of cornbread stuffing. When the German women filed in, they hesitated, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. Real turkey, real food, not powdered eggs or rationed soup. Sam, standing by the serving line, met Greta's eyes for the first time since that first day. She held his gaze and said softly, "Thank you, Mr. Washington." Her accent wrapped around the words carefully, like something fragile she didn't want to break. Sam nodded once. "You're welcome, ma'am." As they ate, Liesl looked up from her plate and pointed to the golden crumbs mixed into the stuffing. "This bread?" she asked Mitchell, the Nebraska farm boy sitting across from her. "What do you call these yellow pieces?" "Cornbread stuffing," Mitchell replied with a grin. "Same thing you laughed at before, just mixed up a little different." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Greta smiled. And then, laughter. Real, warm, unguarded laughter spread through the room. Even Sam laughed from behind the serving counter, shaking his head. Guess it just needed a new recipe. That evening, the camp glowed with something that had nothing to do with the stoves or lanterns. It was a kind of shared relief that maybe, just maybe, the war couldn't take everything human away from them. But December brought the kind of news that breaks even the strongest spirit. Margaret received the telegram first. She was sorting reports at her desk when the clerk from the main camp brought it in, the envelope trembling slightly in his hand. She read it once, then again, hoping she'd misread the words. Marcus Washington, missing in action, following naval engagement near the Philippines. Her throat went dry. Sam's son, his only child. She sat there for a long time, the telegram clutched in her hand, trying to find the right way to tell him. There wasn't one. She found him in the kitchen, peeling potatoes. His face was calm, almost too calm. "Sam," she said gently, "there's been a message." He turned slowly, and when she handed him the paper, his eyes didn't move at first. Then they did, and his shoulders sagged. "Missing," he murmured. "Not dead, just missing." Margaret nodded, wishing she could offer something better than silence. He set the knife down, staring at nothing. "He always wanted to see the ocean," he said quietly. "Guess he did." 3 hours later, another envelope arrived, a Red Cross letter for Greta. Margaret hesitated before delivering it. Greta was in the common room, helping Liesl with English pronunciation. Say it again, she was saying patiently. The word is enough. Not enough. The GH is silent. Margaret waited until the lesson ended. Greta, she said softly, a letter came for you. The German woman's face paled as she took the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable, Anna's, but it was brief, rushed, written in trembling lines that told their own story. Hamburg bombed again. The harbor gone. I cannot find Mama or the children. If this letter reaches you, know that we tried to survive. I love you always. Greta's vision blurred. She read the words twice, then pressed the page to her chest. Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder, but said nothing. There were no words for this kind of loss. That night, two figures in different buildings sat in the same kind of silence. Sam in his kitchen, staring at a folded telegram. Greta in her barrack, clutching her sister's letter. Both grieving across an ocean neither could cross. For the first time since the war began, both understood something that the propaganda on either side had never told them. That sorrow spoke the same language everywhere. December arrived like a gray shroud. The first snow came softly, delicate flakes drifting across the Iowa sky, landing on barbed wire and wooden fences, turning even confinement into something quietly beautiful. But the beauty didn't last. By mid-month, a brutal storm rolled in from the Dakotas, hammering the plains with unrelenting fury. Winds howled through the camp like restless ghosts, carrying icy shards that cut through coats and stung the skin. Inside, the mood had sunk to match the weather. The telegrams, Sam's from the Navy, Greta's from Hamburg, had left both of them hollowed out. They went about their duties, silent and mechanical. The camp, once filled with the faint rhythm of recovery, now pulsed with quiet grief. Sam cooked, but without heart. He served meals that met regulation, but not compassion. Greta still organized English lessons, though her voice carried the weight of someone teaching on autopilot. Even Margaret noticed the stillness spreading like frost. The guards spoke less, their footsteps sounding heavier on the frozen ground. It was as though Camp Alona itself had gone into mourning. Then came December 18th. The blizzard hit with almost biblical ferocity. The first gusts slammed against the barracks just before sundown, rattling the thin walls. Within an hour, the power flickered and died. By nightfall, the camp was plunged into freezing darkness. Pipes froze. The old heating boilers groaned and failed. Within minutes, the temperature inside dropped to bone-numbing cold. Margaret acted fast. She ordered all personnel and prisoners to gather in the only building with functional heat, the mess hall. The guards moved through the storm, half carrying some of the women through knee-deep snow. Visibility dropped to near zero. Breath came out in white plumes. The wind screamed like a living thing. Inside the mess hall, chaos turned to survival instinct. Old metal drums were converted into makeshift braziers. Sam oversaw the effort, pouring kerosene, lighting matches, managing the flames like a conductor keeping an orchestra alive. The Germans huddled on one side, guards on the other, but the separation didn't last long. The storm didn't care about uniforms. It equalized everyone. Blankets were passed around. Coffee, strong, bitter, precious, was shared in chipped mugs. Someone found a deck of cards. The sound of shuffling paper echoed through the room, oddly comforting amid the wind's constant assault. Margaret stood by the door, coat wrapped tight, watching it all. For a moment, she thought of her son, of Tommy's smile in his Navy photo, and realized that every person here was someone's child, someone's sibling. And then, from the corner of the room, a sound broke through the storm. A soft voice, tentative, trembling, began to hum. Liesel. The melody was old, older than any war. Stille Nacht, silent night. At first, only her voice carried through the cold air, delicate as frost on glass. Then Greta joined, harmonizing softly in German. The guards turned their heads. Margaret's throat tightened. And then, slowly, another voice joined in. Sam's deep baritone, singing the English words that matched their German ones perfectly. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. The melody spread, catching like fire. More voices added themselves. Guards, prisoners, even Margaret herself. English and German verses blended until the distinction disappeared entirely. For 3 minutes, the storm outside didn't exist. There were no sides, no victors, no prisoners, just voices rising together in fragile harmony. When the final note faded, the silence that followed felt sacred. Greta sat for a long time after that, her hands folded in her lap, eyes on the flickering light. The warmth from the makeshift fire painted soft gold across the faces around her. Sam's steady, lined with exhaustion. Margaret's pale, reflective. Lysel's young, still bright with hope. Something inside Greta shifted. The memory of her mother's voice came back. When someone offers you bread, you thank them, even if it tastes of sawdust. Bread. She rose quietly and crossed the room. Sam looked up, surprised to see her approaching. "Mr. Washington," she said in halting English, "please teach me to make bread." For a moment, he just stared. Then, slowly, he nodded. He stood, motioning her toward the kitchen. The others watched in silence as the two disappeared through the swinging door, the flicker of the stove's light following them. The kitchen was colder than the mess hall, but the air still smelled faintly of flour and coffee. Sam lit one of the gas burners, the blue flame flickering weakly against the storm outside. He gathered what little ingredients they had left: cornmeal, flour, a small tin of baking powder, salt, a bit of sugar. "First thing," he said, his voice rough but steady, "you got to understand, cornbread ain't trying to be wheat bread. It's its own thing." Greta watched, listening intently as if this were a sermon. "My grandmother used to say it's honest food," Sam continued, pouring the cornmeal into a bowl. "It doesn't pretend to be fancy. It's what folks made when they had nothing but grit and hope left." He let her run her fingers through the meal. It felt gritty, real, like earth. "In the old days," he went on, "this was survival. Folks made this to keep families alive when there wasn't much else. It reminds you that sometimes making do is the same as making it." Greta nodded, her eyes glistening. "Like in Hamburg," she murmured. "When bombs came, we make soup from potato skins." Sam looked at her, and for the first time, truly saw her, not as enemy, not as prisoner, but as another human being who had been through her own kind of hell. He said quietly, "Then you already understand cornbread." They mixed the batter together in silence, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of the spoon against the metal bowl. The storm still howled outside, but in that small kitchen, warmth had returned. As the cornbread baked, the smell filled the air, rich, golden, comforting. Greta leaned against the counter, watching the oven door fog with steam. "It smells like," she began softly, searching for the English word. "Hope," Sam smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said, "that's about right." By morning, the blizzard had passed. The camp woke under a pale sun that glinted off untouched snow like a field of diamonds. The world outside was silent, still, the kind of peace that feels both earned and temporary. When the women returned to their barracks, they found a small surprise waiting for them. On each table sat a single square of golden cornbread, still warm, wrapped carefully in paper. No one laughed this time. Greta gathered the women and bowed her head before eating. "This," she said in German, "is bread." And as they ate, the guards outside smiled quietly, the scent of cornbread drifting through the winter air, not as a symbol of mockery or pride anymore, but of something far greater. It was survival turned into grace. That spring, long after the snow had melted, Camp Alona received orders to transfer its prisoners back east for repatriation. On their final morning, Greta approached Sam one last time. She handed him a folded piece of paper, her handwriting careful, deliberate. He opened it. Inside was a simple recipe written in both German and English. Meisbrot, cornbread. 2 cups cornmeal, 1 of flour, milk if you have it, water if you don't. Bake until golden. Serve warm and never forget to share. Beneath it, she had written, "Thank you for teaching me that kindness has no nation." Sam read it twice, his eyes wet. "You take care now, Miss Hoffman," he said quietly. She smiled. "And you, Mr. Washington." As the trucks carried the women away, Margaret stood beside Sam, watching the convoy vanish into the horizon. "You think they'll remember?" she asked. Sam nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "They'll remember the cornbread,